I walked out of a 29-year marriage and caught a one-way flight to Lisbon. My ex-wife married a man she'd known for 4 months. My son stood beside him at the altar, called him a visionary, said he was exactly what she deserved after all those years with me. I was sitting on a terrace above the Tagus River, learning to breathe again when I got the message. 6 months after the wedding, at Gavin Merritt's sold-out Financial Freedom Seminar in downtown Denver, a 72-year-old woman in a cream blazer raised her hand during the Q&A session. The microphone was open. The recording went everywhere. By the next morning, 900,000 people had watched it. And at 11 that night, my ex-wife called me in tears, demanding to know why I'd done this to her. Thank you for being here. I genuinely appreciate every one of you who takes time to sit with these stories. Quick question before we get into it. Where are you watching from today? Drop your city in the comments. I love seeing where this community reaches. A fair warning. This story contains fictionalized elements included for educational purposes. Any resemblance to real people or events is coincidental, but the lessons underneath, the truth of what I learned about silence and survival, and what happens when foundations finally crack, those are real. My name is Dwight. I'm 63 years old, and this is the story of how I learned that disappearing quietly is sometimes the most powerful thing a man can do. It started in Denver, Colorado. Not the postcard version of Denver, not hiking trails and craft breweries. The version I lived in was a $1.9 million house in the Cherry Hills neighborhood, floor-to-ceiling windows. A backyard that my ex-wife had landscaped 3 times in 5 years, because the aesthetic never matched her vision. She had a gift for making spaces beautiful, and making the people inside them feel insufficient. We were married 29 years. I spent most of them as senior vice president of operations at a regional natural gas company. Not glamorous work, but work that mattered. Pipelines and contracts and quarterly filings. I built things that ran beneath the ground, invisible and essential. My ex-wife preferred the visible kind of success, the kind with a good label. By year 20, I was sleeping in the guest room. By year 25, I'd stopped trying to predict which version of her disappointment I'd walk into each evening. I just knew I carried it everywhere, that particular weight of someone who has given up expecting you to be enough. We had 2 kids. My daughter is 31, a physical therapist in Chicago. Sharp, grounded, reads people the way I read balance sheets. She saw through her mother's performance long before I had the courage to name it. My son is 28, a financial advisor in Denver, smart, ambitious, and absolutely certain, for most of his adult life, that his mother's unhappiness was my fault. Her words eventually coming out of his mouth. The heart attack came on a Thursday morning in November. Not a full attack. What the cardiologist called a significant cardiac event, which is medical language for the kind of warning that doesn't let you pretend you didn't hear it. I was in a meeting reviewing pipeline contracts when my left arm went numb. I thought I was pulling a muscle. I was not pulling a muscle. The doctor sat across from me in a room that smelled like recycled air and said, "Mr. Callahan, your body has been sending signals for years. You stopped listening. This is what it looks like when the signals get louder." She didn't say the word stress once. She didn't have to. I lay in that hospital bed for 2 days staring at a ceiling I'd never examined before, and I thought a simple, awful thought. I could die in this life, easily, without anything changing. The house would go on being beautiful. The guest room would go on being mine. My daughter flew in from Chicago the morning of the 2nd day. She sat in the chair beside my bed and held my hand and didn't say much. That's how she's always been. Solid in a way that doesn't announce itself. My son called late that afternoon. He asked if I was stable. I said yes. He said he was relieved and had to get back to a client dinner. I heard my ex-wife in the background, asking him to pick up something from the grocery store on his way over. Not asking about me. Not asking anything about me. The discharge nurse, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and no patience for nonsense, handed me my paperwork and said, "Take the next part of your life seriously, okay? The first part is already written." I thought about that the whole drive home. That night, my ex-wife knocked on the guest room door. "The Hendersons are having their anniversary party Saturday. You'll need to shave and find something that fits properly. That blazer has been too tight for 2 years." I looked at her and said nothing. She waited a moment, then left. I lay in the dark with my hand on my chest, still beating, still here, and I thought surviving and living are not the same thing. I gave myself 4 months, December through March. My retirement package from the company was substantial. I won't bore you with all of it, but I'd been quietly managing our investments for years without my ex-wife ever asking a single question. Money was my department, Being invisible was my department. I established a trust for my daughter. She became the sole trustee of an amount her mother had no legal access to. I researched Portugal's D7 passive income visa, which requires proof of regular income above a certain threshold. I qualified without difficulty. Found a furnished apartment in Lisbon's Alfama district, above the old city with a terrace that looked out over the river. 2 bedrooms. Laundry on the roof. €15,400 a month. The Denver house was worth $1.9 million mortgage-free. I left it to my ex-wife. Left her both cars, all the furniture, every piece of the life we'd built together. I wanted none of it. I wanted to stop carrying what it weighed. I told my daughter everything over video call in January. Walked her through the trust, the timeline, the date. She listened without interrupting. Then she said, "Dad, you should have done this 5 years ago." Pause. "Your son is going to be angry." "I know. I'll be here when he's ready." That's all I needed to hear. I didn't tell my son. At 28, he was still living inside his mother's version of the story. Some people need their illusions to crack on their own terms. I couldn't do it for him. March 11th. I packed 2 suitcases and a carry-on. 29 years of a life, and that's what fit. I left the divorce papers on the kitchen island, house keys on top. A note underneath that said, "Everything here is yours. I'm gone. The property taxes are due in April." I closed the front door and didn't look back. At Denver International, I called my daughter. "It's done." Long pause. "Text me when you land." The flight to Lisbon went through Newark. 11 hours total. Somewhere over the Atlantic, drinking weak airline coffee and watching the dark water below, I noticed something. My arm wasn't numb. My chest wasn't tight. I wasn't carrying anything that didn't belong to me. 6 months later, her new marriage would put my son in danger, and I'd have to decide how far I was willing to reach from the other side of the ocean. The Alfama apartment came with a landlord named Senor Figueiredo, who was 78 years old and thought Americans were either very rich or very lost. He wasn't wrong about me. I was somewhere in between, finding my footing. The terrace looked east toward the Tagus and south toward the old castle on the hill. Mornings, I'd make coffee and watch the light change over the city. Afternoons, I'd walk the narrow streets, practicing my Portuguese with shopkeepers who were social with me. I took a cooking class. I started sleeping 8 hours a night, which I hadn't done in probably 15 years. My blood pressure, which had been 148/92 when I left Denver, dropped to 118/71 within 3 months. The body keeps its own receipts. My daughter called every Sunday. She was doing well in Chicago, engaged to a good man named Ben, who was steady and easy, and clearly crazy about her. My son hadn't called. She said he needed time. I gave him space. The message came on a Wednesday evening. I was on my terrace reading, watching the ferries cross the river, when a LinkedIn notification came in from a former colleague. A man named Mitch Farley, who'd covered the Denver business community as a reporter for 30 years before retiring. We'd crossed paths on a few stories involving the energy sector. Good instincts, careful Sourcer. His message was 4 sentences. Thought you should know. Phyllis is getting remarried next month. Guy named Gavin Merritt. Calls himself a wealth strategist. Figured you'd want a heads up. I read it twice. Set the phone face down on the patio table. Picked it up again. Gavin Merritt's public presence was substantial. A YouTube channel with 182,000 subscribers. An Instagram that was a masterclass in aspirational staging. Chartered jets that appeared in one post and never again. A Scottsdale office that looked more like a set than a workplace. Client testimonials from people who were never named or verified. His website advertised high-conviction real estate partnerships and a flagship product called the Merritt Capital Fund, promising 8 to 12% annual returns for qualified investors. Upcoming financial freedom retreat, $4,500 per person, limited to 40 participants. I'd spent 29 years looking at numbers for a living. You learn to see what's missing before you see what's there. I searched Colorado DORA, the Department of Regulatory Agencies, for any registered securities offerings, nothing under Merritt Capital. I pulled FINRA's broker check. Gavin Merritt had 2 customer disputes filed in the past 3 years, both settled quietly, one for $87,000. I cross-referenced his name in the Ohio Division of Securities Enforcement Records and found a 2018 administrative action against a Gary Merrittson for unregistered securities offerings. Fine $63,000, license surrendered, no admission of wrongdoing. One more search. Gavin Merritt had legally changed his name from Gary Merrittson in Colorado in 2019. Different name, same playbook. I called Mitch that same night. "Mitch, it's Dwight Callahan." "Dwight, I figured you'd call. You look it up?" I looked it up. "How bad?" Ohio enforcement action in 2018. Names changed the following year. FINRA disputes settled quietly. No SEC registration I can find for any fund. He's running the same operation he ran before, in a different state, with a different name. Long silence. You want to do something about it. I want the truth to have a voice, I said. Someone who can ask the right questions in the right room. He was quiet for a moment. I know exactly who you need. Constance Park spent 26 years as a special agent in IRS criminal investigation, specializing in financial fraud. She'd put away 24 people for tax evasion, securities manipulation, and Ponzi schemes. She was 72 years old. She looked like someone who ran a church book club. Silver hair, always dressed for a museum lecture, soft voice, completely unassuming. She never argued. She just asked questions that unwound people like thread, pulled from a loose seam. She'd been testifying as an expert witness in fraud cases since retiring. Mitch had known her for 20 years. She can get into the seminar, Mitch said. It's open registration. $4,500 buys a seat. I'll register both of us. She goes as my +1. Retired financial educator curious about alternative investments. He'll have no idea. I sent everything I'd found. The Ohio enforcement records, the FINRA complaints, the name change documentation, the missing SEC registration. Constance called me once, one call, 10 minutes, very direct. Mr. Callahan, I want you to understand what I can and cannot do. I can't ask questions. In a public seminar, on a live microphone, in front of 200 people. I cannot make accusations I can't support. I won't need to. The questions themselves will be sufficient. Then she said, your son will be in that room. I hadn't told her that. She'd found it herself. His name was on Gavin's website, listed as an associate advisor and presenting partner for the event. I know, I said. He needs to hear it, she said. He will. My son called me the week before the seminar. First call in 7 months. His voice was formal, like calling a vendor he wasn't sure he liked. Dad, I'm calling because I want you to know I'm going to be presenting at Gavin's event next month. He brought me in to speak on the Colorado real estate angle of the fund. It's a significant opportunity. Pause. I know you've probably heard about the remarriage. I know it wasn't. I know you're upset. I turned off the kettle, sat down. I'm not upset, son. I'm glad you called. He's good for her, Dad. I've seen them together. She's happy. I'm glad she's happy. You don't sound glad. I sound like a man who's trying not to fight with his son. I paused. You're presenting at his event. Are you also investing in the fund? Silence. It's a solid opportunity. I've done my research. How much? More silence. That's not really your business anymore. Son, I kept my voice level. You are a financial advisor. You know how to verify an investment. Have you pulled SEC registration for the Merit Capital Fund? Have you run his name through FINRA? Have you searched the Ohio Securities Enforcement database? I paused. Do those things before you present. Not because I'm asking you, because you do it for any client. I don't need a due diligence lecture from someone who walked out and moved to Europe. The line went dead. I sat for a long time watching the light on the river. My coffee went cold. The evening was still beautiful. That didn't help. The seminar was on a Saturday in April, the Prospect Hotel Ballroom in downtown Denver. 200 attendees at $4,500 a seat. Gavin Merritt's largest event to date. The fund was seeking $3 million in new commitments that afternoon. My daughter sent updates from the hotel lobby, where she'd positioned herself with a friend who had registered. 10:47 a.m. Denver, 5:47 p.m. Lisbon. Gavin just walked in. The suit costs more than most people's monthly rent. My son is already on stage, setting up. He looks confident. That makes this harder. 11:15 a.m. Your son presented. He was good, Dad. Really good. I hate that this is what it took. 12:30 p.m. Lunch break. Constance has been in the third row all morning, taking notes. Gavin stopped to talk to her during the break. He gave her his business card. She told him she manages her late husband's trust and is looking for yield alternatives. He was completely charmed. 120 just opened. Floor microphone. Mitch's hand went up. But Constance is already standing. My phone rang at 1:24 p.m. Lisbon time, my daughter whispering from the lobby. She's walking to the microphone, Dad. Okay. Your son is on stage. He's going to see everything in real time. I know. Dad, are you sure about this? I'm sure the truth is better than the alternative. Record if you can. The line stayed open. I heard ambient ballroom sound, the shuffle of 200 people settling into their chairs, then a microphone click. I set the phone on the table and looked out at the Tagus. The afternoon sun was hitting the water at an angle that turned it copper. A ferry was crossing slowly from the far bank. Somewhere in Denver, a 72-year-old woman in a cream blazer was clearing her throat. The video arrived in my email the next morning with 340,000 views already. My daughter had gotten a clean recording from 15 feet away. By afternoon, it would cross 1 million. I made coffee, sat down, pressed play. Constance Park stood at the floor microphone with the composure of someone who had spent decades in federal proceedings. She let the room settle completely before she spoke. Thank you. My name is Constance Park. I've spent most of my career in financial crime investigation, and I have to say, a slight warm smile, unhurried, this presentation has been one of the most educational things I've attended in years. On stage, Gavin smiled back. He had no idea. Mr. Merritt, I'm genuinely curious about something, and I hope you'll indulge me. You've described the Merritt Capital Fund as a qualified investment opportunity projecting returns of 8 to 12% annually. For a registered securities offering, that's quite a claim. Pause. Could you share the SEC registration number with the room? For those of us who'd like to verify it through EDGAR before we submit our investment documents this afternoon? The room shifted, not dramatically, the way a room shifts when people realize a question has more weight than it first appeared. Gavin's smile held, but his eyes changed. We operate under exemptions that don't require traditional registration. Regulation D, yes, Constance said pleasantly. I'm familiar with the exemptions, which applies here 506-BA or 506-A, and have attendees in this room been pre-verified as accredited investors as required under either? She tilted her head. I noticed there's no accreditation verification in the registration process. That matters because the penalties for offering unregistered securities to non-accredited investors are quite serious under federal law. She paused. I also want to ask about Ohio. Her voice didn't change, still pleasant, still measured. In 2018, a man named Gary Merrittson surrendered his Ohio securities license and paid a $63,000 fine for unregistered securities offerings. Mr. Merrittson legally changed his name to Gavin Merritt in Colorado in 2019 and relocated his operation here. A beat. Is that accurate? I ask because it's a matter of public record, and I imagine some people in this room searched your name before purchasing a seat today. I want to make sure they searched the right name. Phones were out across the ballroom now, fingers moving, faces going still. On stage, my son had gone completely motionless. The color had drained from his face. Constance raised her voice only slightly, addressing the room as much as Gavin. I don't raise these things to cause distress. I raise them because I spent 26 years watching what happens to people who invest their savings in funds that don't hold up to scrutiny. Retirement accounts, second mortgages, money set aside for grandchildren. Every one of those people sat in a room exactly like this one, feeling exactly the excitement you felt an hour ago. Her voice went quieter, almost gentle. The deadline on that investment form, she gestured toward the sign-up packets on every chair, is a feature of the pitch, not a feature of the opportunity. Check before you sign. Colorado Securities has a public portal. FINRA broker check is free. EDGAR takes 30 seconds. Do not let an afternoon deadline prevent you from doing the work that protects you. She set the microphone back carefully. Thank you very much for your time. The recording ended there. But the rest came through comment sections and news articles over the following days. Multiple attendees rescinded signed commitment forms within 48 hours. The Colorado Division of Securities opened a formal investigation within the week. FINRA filed its own inquiry. Gavin Merritt's YouTube channel went private. His website disappeared. Local Denver business coverage picked it up first, then national financial fraud outlets, then a segment on a regional broadcast station. The clip was being shared in Facebook groups for fraud victims under the caption, "This is what accountability sounds like." My son's check, $65,000, his entire savings mailed to Gavin's firm 3 days before the seminar, was stopped before it cleared. My daughter had called his bank independently, flagged the transaction, and provided the Ohio enforcement documents as supporting evidence. She'd been researching Gavin in parallel for 2 weeks without telling me. She didn't ask permission. She just did what needed doing. My phone rang at 11 o'clock that night, Lisbon time, my ex-wife. I let it ring twice, answered. Her voice was ragged. Fury and panic braided together in that specific way I recognized from 20 years of marriage. The sound she made when something she'd constructed publicly began coming apart publicly. You did this. You sent that woman. You couldn't just leave and let us have this. I waited until she finished. She had a great deal to finish. Then I said, I'm sitting on a terrace in Lisbon. It's nearly midnight here. I don't know who that woman is or why she was at that seminar, but everything she said is on public record. Anyone could have found it. Someone always was going to. You destroyed my marriage. You married a man who changed his name after a securities enforcement action in another state. That's not something I did to you. Silence. The house, she said. Her voice had changed, smaller now, stripped of the fury. I sold the house. Gavin said we needed liquidity to invest alongside the fund, that we'd be positioned ahead of the other investors. Long pause. I put most of it in. I closed my eyes. When I'd left, I'd given her a $1.9 million house, paid off and free. She'd sold it and given most of the proceeds to the man she'd married. That was the piece that explained everything that came after. How much did you put in? I asked. She didn't answer. Call a securities attorney first thing Monday morning, I said. Not a financial advisor, a securities attorney. Tell them the amount, the dates, every document you signed. There may be a path to partial recovery depending on what assets are seized during the investigation. Pause. That's what I can offer you. The line went dead. I sat in the dark above the Tagus for a long time. The city was quiet. A boat was moving somewhere on the water, its running lights small and steady against the black. 3 weeks later, my son called. His voice was completely different from every call before. Not formal, not defensive. Flat in the specific way people sound after something has taken the fight out of them. Dad. Son. He's gone. Cleared out whatever was left in the company accounts and disappeared. Colorado issued a warrant. They found him in Phoenix 4 days later. Long pause. Mom lost almost everything. The house proceeds, her retirement savings, everything she'd moved into the fund. She's staying with a friend from her book club. I didn't say anything. My check, he said. Dana stopped it. I know. You both knew before I did. He stopped. Started again. Why didn't you just tell me directly, Dad? Why not call and say, here are the Ohio records, here's what I found, don't give this man your money? I tried, you hung up on me. A long silence. I know, he said quietly, I know I did. Son. I defended her version of everything for so long. Her version of who you were, why you left, what kind of man you'd been. I chose it because it was easier than looking at anything else. And then I'm standing on a stage next to a man who changed his name to avoid a fraud conviction, and a 72-year-old woman is asking questions in front of 200 people. And I'm standing there realizing I have to rebuild everything I thought I understood about the last 10 years. That's a hard thing to stand in the middle of. Yeah. His voice broke slightly at the edges. I'm sorry, Dad, for not listening. For choosing her version when you were right there offering me another one. I'm sorry for a lot. We talked for almost 2 hours. He asked about Lisbon. Asked about my health, asked what I did with my days. I told him honestly. I walk. I cook badly and I'm getting better. I practice Portuguese with a landlord who has infinite patience for me. I sleep. I feel for the first time in a very long time like I am living the days rather than enduring them. He visited that fall, 12 days. We walked the city until our feet ached. We ate dinner the way the Portuguese do, at 9 or 10 at night, talking for hours over food that cost almost nothing and tasted like everything. We drove south and surfed at a beach near Setúbal and got completely dismantled by the Atlantic. On the last evening, sitting on my terrace with wine and the lights of the old city below, he said, I get it now. Why you left? I said, I didn't leave you. He said, I know that now. That was the whole conversation. That was enough. Now it's a year and a half later. Gavin Merritt, Gary Merrittson, was indicted on 11 counts of securities fraud, wire fraud, and money laundering. He pled not guilty. The trial lasted 4 weeks. The jury deliberated 6 hours. Guilty on 9 counts. He's currently serving 7 years at a federal facility outside Denver. Investors recovered, after asset liquidation, roughly 37 cents on the dollar. Not enough. It never is. My ex-wife rebuilt more slowly. She lost the house proceeds, her retirement account, and most of the social world that had come with being Gavin Merritt's wife. She's in a 1-bedroom apartment in Aurora now, working part-time at a title insurance company. She called my daughter once, asking for financial help. My daughter helped her find a credit counselor and said no to money. She didn't call me again. My son went through a genuinely hard year. 2 clients of his own left after the seminar video circulated and connected him publicly to Gavin's operation, even though he'd done nothing wrong and walked away before any investment cleared. He issued a clean public statement with the full documented timeline, hired a reputation firm, and rebuilt methodically. He started therapy in January and told me in March it was the most useful thing he'd done in years. He's doing well now. He met a woman named Ray, a landscape architect from Portland, funny and unhurried, and completely unimpressed by anyone's status. And they've been together since last summer. He called me when things got serious, asked what I thought. I said, "I think you've learned how to see people clearly now." He said, "Yeah, I think that's right." My daughter got married last spring. Small ceremony in the Berkshires. 40 people, a tent on a hillside, late afternoon light coming sideways through the trees. I walked her down the aisle. She wore her grandmother's pearl earrings. I cried more than I expected, and she didn't seem surprised at all. As for me, my blood pressure is 114/70. I've lost 18 pounds without trying. I surf twice a week at a beach 40 minutes south of the city. My Portuguese is genuinely conversational now, good enough to have a real argument with Senor Figueiredo about the right way to prepare bacalhau. I have a small circle of people here, expats, local shopkeepers, a retired British surgeon 2 streets over who makes excellent gin and tonic and asks nothing of anyone. My investments are managed conservatively and generate enough to live comfortably within my means. I am not lonely. That was the assumption everyone made. That leaving would mean loneliness, that solitude was a punishment and not a gift. What I found was the opposite. I had been lonely for 20 years inside a full house. Sitting alone on this terrace now, watching the ferries cross the Tagus, as the light goes off the water in the evening, I feel more genuinely connected to something real than I did in any of those years of performing adequacy in a house designed for appearances. I feel no bitterness toward my ex-wife. I know that sounds unlikely, Izzy, but it's simply true. I feel something closer to clarity about who we each were and what we each needed, and why neither of us could give the other what the marriage required. She wanted a life that looked a certain way. I could never be the right piece of that picture. I stopped trying too late, but I stopped. That's what mattered. People ask me if I'm happy. Happy seems like the wrong word now. Too small, too dependent on conditions. What I am is present, accountable to myself in a way I never managed when I was accountable to everyone else's expectations first. The lesson took me too long to learn, but here it is, and it's yours without charge. Verify the foundation before you build on it, before you give someone your money, your trust, your years, your son's faith, your savings. Verify the foundation. Court filings are public. Enforcement actions are public. FINRA broker check is free. EGGAR takes 30 seconds. State securities databases are there for exactly this purpose. 15 minutes of honest looking will tell you what charm can spend years concealing. Charm is not character. Urgency is not opportunity. A deadline on an investment form is a manipulation tactic, not a real deadline. And the other lesson, the harder one, the one I had to lose everything I'd built to learn. Your life is not a sacrifice to be made. It is a thing to be lived, not endured for someone else's satisfaction, not made smaller and quieter to fit someone else's definition of acceptable. Lived, fully, honestly, specifically in whatever language and whatever time zone and whatever city you finally find your way to. Don't wait for the cardiac event to hear what you already know. If something in this story landed somewhere in you, leave a comment below. Share it with someone who's still waiting for permission to begin. Subscribe if you want more stories like this one, the kind where the truth finally gets the microphone. Thank you for staying all the way to the end. I see you.